The stage was cold beneath Amara's satin point shoes. She waited in the wings, every muscle tuned like a cello string, years of discipline coursing through her veins. Her mocha-brown skin shimmered with a light sheen of sweat under the soft glow of backstage bulbs. She was ready, more than ready. This was the International Ballet Grand Prix, and Amara Dubois had come not just to compete, but to claim what had always been denied her. She had trained with the best, danced with the grace of a swan and the fire of a storm. But as she stood waiting for her number to be called, the whispers began. "She's too urban," muttered a thin-lipped judge behind a clipboard. "Her lines are strong, but they lack classical refinement," said another, their eyes skimming past Amara to a porcelain-skinned ballerina adjusting her tiara nearby. Amara heard it all. She had been hearing it since she was 8. Too bold, too expressive, too different, never delicate enough. Never the embodiment of tradition, at least not the tradition they clung to with their ivory knuckles and pastel tutus. Still, she pushed forward. Her number was skipped. She blinked, thinking it was a mistake. The announcer had gone from contestant number 42, hers, to number 43 without hesitation. She stepped forward, confused. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I think you missed my—" "You must have misunderstood," snapped a coordinator, blonde bun tight as the tension in the air. "Only finalists are performing tonight." Amara's heart dropped. "But I am a finalist. I got the confirmation letter." The woman's eyes flicked to her, then narrowed. There must have been an error. The other dancers watched, some with sympathy, others with smug satisfaction. A few stifled giggles. One mockingly mimicked Amara's last audition move when she turned away. Amara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She was not new to humiliation, but this was venomous. A deliberate exclusion masked as clerical oversight. They had erased her, silenced her performance without ever letting her dance. She stood frozen, pulse pounding like a timpani, eyes darting to the stage where yet another pale porcelain dancer floated across to thunderous applause. She could walk away. She should walk away. But then came the final cut. Judge Hawthorne, the chairman himself, leaned over and said to the others at the panel just loud enough, "We can't let just anyone redefine ballet." The words slithered into her ears and coiled in her chest like smoke. Amara turned slowly, not saying a word, her back held regal and unbowed. She left the theater not in shame, but in silence. And silence, when held by the right woman, is more dangerous than a scream. She dialed one number. Her husband answered on the first ring. "It's time," was all she said. He didn't ask what had happened. He just said, "Then let them pay." Julian. Dubois wasn't just rich. He was influential. The kind of man whose name never appeared in headlines, but whose decisions shifted markets, restructured industries, and rewrote fates. Tech mogul. Venture capitalist. Owner of 5 international ballet foundations, though he rarely spoke of them publicly. But tonight, as he stood at the window of their Manhattan penthouse, staring out at the midnight skyline, his expression was carved from stone. Amara had only said 3 words. "It's time," and that had been enough. She arrived home barely an hour later, heels in hand, ballet bag slung over her shoulder like a war-torn flag. She didn't need to explain. He could see it in her eyes. The sting, the betrayal, the strength barely holding. Together beneath the surface, Julian wrapped her in his arms. "They humiliated you," he murmured. "They tried," she corrected, her voice raw but steady. He kissed her forehead. "Then it's done. No more patience, no more diplomacy. They want to gatekeep tradition? Let's show them who owns the stage." He moved quickly, like a man executing a hostile takeover. Only this time, the target was the ballet world itself. Within 24 hours, the Hawthorne Foundation, a key sponsor of the Grand Prix, was under investigation. An anonymous whistleblower had dropped years of financial inconsistencies into the laps of federal regulators. The board scrambled. Funding froze. A respected dance publication released a bombshell exposé. Silenced on stage. The black ballerina. The judges ignored. It included a leaked recording of Judge Hawthorne's thinly veiled racist comment. The article went viral within hours. Social media erupted. Julian quietly withdrew $80 million in pledged funding from the competition's Umbrella Foundation. In a terse email, he cited institutional bias and discriminatory exclusion practices. But this wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was prelude. Julian wasn't interested in burning their palace. He was building a new one. He convened a meeting with top choreographers, cultural historians, and international investors. In 48 hours, the blueprint was drawn. A global ballet initiative, the Lirio Project, named after Amara's mother, a Haitian dancer who died too young to see her daughter break through. The Lirio Project would provide full scholarships, residencies, and global stage opportunities to dancers of color with a strict diversity clause built into its charter. Then came the cherry on top. Julian bought out the theater that had hosted the Grand Prix, flat out. No negotiations. They were evicted within weeks. Hostile? Someone had the nerve to ask. Julian smiled coolly at the press. Corrective. Meanwhile, Amara watched from behind the scenes. She hadn't asked for any of this, not out of revenge. But when she saw the headlines, the footage of little brown girls leaping with joy as they were told they'd receive funding to study dance in Paris, London, and New York, she cried. Not because she was broken, but because something unbreakable had finally been set in motion, and yet the real reckoning hadn't even begun. There was still one more stage she needed to claim, not with her husband's power, but with her own. 3 weeks passed. The scandal still rippled through the dance world, fracturing it at the seams. The Grand Prix was suspended. 2 judges resigned in disgrace. Sponsors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Ballet forums debated furiously. Some defended tradition, while others finally dared to name what had long festered in silence. The racism masked as refinement, the glass ceilings glossed in ivory tutus. But Amara Dubois had disappeared from public view. No interviews, no press releases, no vindictive tweets. She let the world churn in the chaos they had created for themselves. She was somewhere else entirely. In a private rehearsal hall tucked behind a Harlem Arts Center, Amara danced, alone, free. The floor was hers again, not cold and clinical like the competition stage, but warm with history. This was where Alvin Ailey had once walked, where legends were born not in silence but in soul. Amara stood at the bar, facing her reflection in the long mirror, hair pulled into a tight bun, leotard like armor, music floating gently from a small speaker. Each plie and releve was precise but filled with something more, something the judges had never understood. Emotion, truth, legacy. She wasn't practicing for the Grand Prix anymore. That stage had tried to erase her. Now she was preparing for the debut performance of the Lirio Project's inaugural showcase, Unbowed. Julian had reserved the opening night at the very theater he had bought out from under the Grand Prix committee. And he hadn't done it for the drama. He'd done it because she deserved to stand there, not in protest, but in power. When opening night arrived, the city buzzed with anticipation. Critics, celebrities, and activists crowded into the sold-out venue. A hush fell as the lights dimmed. Backstage, Amara inhaled deeply. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. The curtain rose. She stepped forward into the golden light, dressed not in the pale palette of classical ballet, but in a costume designed in the colors of her heritage, deep maroon, bold gold, midnight black. The music was an original composition, strings laced, with West African drums, soft piano notes cradled by gospel harmonies, and she danced. She danced through grief, her mother's sacrifices, her own heartbreak. She danced through rejection, every whisper, every eye that saw her as less. She danced through rage, not ugly, but cleansing, like a storm clearing a poisoned sky. She danced through hope, rising with each pirouette, each arabesque, each grand jeté. The performance ended in silence. Not because they were unmoved, but because no one dared to break what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a ballet, it was a reckoning, and then applause. Like thunder rolling across mountaintops. People stood shouting her name, Amara, Amara. Amara. Julian sat in the front row, tears in his eyes, hand over his heart. Not for the victory. He had money, influence. But this was something he could never buy. This was her power. The very stage that once denied her had become her altar. But Amara wasn't finished. The next day, she announced something that would shake the ballet world even more than her performance. The morning after her breathtaking debut in Unbowed, Amara stood at a podium beneath a gilded archway, facing a swarm of journalists and dancers outside the newly renamed Dubois Center for Classical and Cultural Dance. The gold-plated logo shimmered. Behind her, no longer a symbol of exclusion but of rebirth. She adjusted the mic. Her voice was calm, unwavering. "I'm announcing the launch of a new international ballet corps," she said. "One that honors discipline and brilliance, not skin tone or gate-kept traditions. And we are holding open auditions in 10 cities across 5 continents. No fees, no barriers. Talent is the only ticket in." A murmur surged through the crowd, quickly overtaken by the clicking frenzy of cameras. Julian stood just behind her, hands clasped, but this wasn't his moment. This was hers. "And one more thing," Amara added, her tone sharpening like the point of her toe on wood. "The final audition will be held right here, at the Dubois Center, on the very stage where I was once denied the right to perform." The silence was thick. No one missed the symbolism. The news exploded online. The anti-Grand Prix is here. Ballet's reckoning has a name, Amara Dubois. No more gatekeeping. A new era of dance begins. Auditions opened in Lagos, Rio, Mumbai, Cape Town, Seoul, and beyond. Videos flooded the internet. Young dancers from humble backgrounds with raw, electrifying talent. Many barefoot, some rehearsing in crumbling studios, but all with fire in their eyes. And Amara watched. Them all. She personally reviewed every submission. She sent encouragement letters. She cried with parents on Zoom. She sent a pair of pointe shoes to a young Sudanese girl who had learned her first pirouette on a dirt road. This wasn't just a competition. This was revolution, and it terrified the old guard. The remaining members of the Grand Prix committee tried to clap back, calling her initiative overly politicized, disruptive, a threat to tradition. Judge Hawthorne even gave an interview saying, "Some people confuse spectacle with substance." Amara didn't respond. She didn't have to, because the final audition, held in New York, was standing room only. Over 300 dancers from 42 countries had traveled to be there. The audience was packed with press, legends, and former critics, many of whom now tried to claim they always saw potential in her. Amara walked onto the stage to begin the day, and the crowd fell silent. She looked out at the rows of hopefuls. Black, brown, white, indigenous, girls in hijabs, boys with neurodivergent brilliance, dancers who had once been told, "Not your look," or "too much flair." She smiled. "You don't need to look like the past," she said. "You are the future." And with that, the music began. Not just for them, but for the ballet world itself. A new rhythm, a new standard. One where no girl would ever again wait backstage just to be erased. But even as she nurtured the future, Amara had one more encounter to face. An unexpected meeting with the very man who had tried to silence her. Judge Hawthorne had requested a private audience. He waited in the shadow of the marble columns like a ghost displaced by time. Judge Hawthorne, formerly the chairman of the International Ballet Grand Prix, stood stiffly in the lobby of the Dubois Center, his hands folded in front of him, looking strangely smaller now. The years of influence, the stern posture of power. They clung to him like a coat 2 sizes too large. Amara approached with poise, her strides deliberate. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. "You asked to see me," she said, plainly. "Yes," Hawthorne replied, clearing his throat, trying to recover dignity he no longer had a claim to. "I felt it was time." "Time?" Amara echoed, tilting her head. "For what? An apology? Redemption? Or just a chance to spin your legacy before someone else writes it for you?" He flinched visibly, but to his credit, he didn't retreat. "I underestimated you," he said slowly. "We all did. We were blind." Or perhaps, he corrected himself with quiet shame, we refused to see. Amara studied him, arms crossed. I won't pretend to undo what's been done, he continued. But I wanted to say that what you're building, it's extraordinary and necessary. She paused. I didn't build it alone, she replied softly. But I did carry its weight for too long in silence. I danced to prove I belonged in a room that was designed to shut me out. Hawthorne lowered his gaze. You shouldn't have had to. No, I shouldn't have, she said, her voice firm now. And no other dancer should either. There was a long silence between them, heavy but not bitter, just honest. He looked up again. I'm retiring. You've changed the course of ballet, Amara, the very foundation of it, and before I disappear into obscurity, I wanted to say I see you now. She didn't smile, but she nodded. That's something, she said, but it's not for me, it's for the ones who come next. With that, she turned and walked away, taller, freer. That evening, the inaugural performance of the Ballet. Corpse filled the world stage. Dancers from Senegal to Sao Paulo, Manila to Mississippi, leapt, turned, and flew across the stage in a symphony of cultures woven into classical form. Every movement challenged history and rewrote it. Amara didn't. Headline this time. She stood in the wings, watching them soar, her hand resting lightly on Julian's shoulder. The man who had burned down walls so she could build windows. She did it, he whispered to himself, not realizing he was speaking aloud. She's just getting started, Amara replied. As the final curtain dropped and the dancers stood breathless. In ovation, the applause roared like never before. Not for tradition, but for transformation. And in the shadows where she had once waited, unseen and unwelcome, Amara now stood as the architect of something enduring. A legacy not of vengeance, but of victory.